everyone, today we have a new gouache painting tutorial where we are painting this misty fall forest landscape. I'm using this B5 size Etchr Lab watercolor sketchbook, and all the painting colors will be listed in the description and also on the screen while I'm using them. So a few things we're going to focus on today are using complementary colors and using a lot of dry brush techniques to create lots of texture in this painting. We'll talk more about that later, so now let's just start with the first step of the whole thing, which will be the background layer for the sky and ground. I wanted a very neutral color for the sky, so I mixed a little bit of brown and blue into a regular white shade to create this very light gray tone. I think using a flat brush is the easiest to get the color evenly to a large surface, but if you don't have a flat brush, any bigger round brush will work as well. So I just swept the color all over this area, and as you can see, I also didn't bother with clean edges this time, so I was just painting on this rectangle area freehand. If you want crisp edges for your painting, you could always use tape to frame the area. I ended up adding a hair more white to the top center part because I wanted that to be the very lightest part in the sky, and then the bottom will have some trees and other details later, so I just kind of added some color variation here to prep the area for those darker colors a little bit. But after that, we're moving right to the ground part where I mixed this quite dark gray-blue tone, and then I added a bit more black and brown towards the bottom of the picture. Overall, I wanted the background in this painting to have a pretty cool bluish gray undertone, which is a complementary color for the orange and yellow tones we're gonna add later. So that's why I tried to keep even the brown and green tones in this picture leaning towards blue, so that the warmer fall tones will pop really nicely against the background in the end. But anyway, we're gonna leave this white stripe to the ground for now, which will later turn into the pathway to the cottage. So now, while we let the ground part dry, let's jump back to the sky and start adding some background trees to the horizon. Again, I was mixing blue and brown at this point, and I also tried to mix a little bit of black and white to all the color mixtures in this painting. I think especially adding white will give this almost dusty quality to the colors, which I think suits a misty landscape very well. It also tones down the saturation of the colors, which makes everything very soft and neutral, and personally I just love to work with colors like these. But anyway, I was just trying to create some very messy evergreen shapes here. They don't have to be perfect. And the way I tried to work here was to use every bit of color and water in my brush before adding more to it. So I was working with a very dry brush to be able to create these very light trees in the end. You're also able to kind of go over the previous shapes and kind of blend the edges a little bit to create a softer gradient to the background color. This is something I've tried to practice recently because I think it allows you to use gouache paints almost as oil or acrylic paints. I think usually when we consider gouache paintings, they tend to have these very clear shapes, but you are also able to blend things together to create these softer shapes, and then by layering, I think it can create very pretty textured areas. But after adding a good amount of these trees to the horizon, we can then move on to add some color to the ground. I think this is the step that took the most time for me in this painting, so I advise you to take your time with it. I think in total this painting took me about 2 hours in real life, and I think I spent at least 30 to 40 minutes with this step. So we are basically just starting to layer some different colors here. I started with some yellow ochre shade, and again I mixed a bit of the previous gray tones and white to these shades to make them slightly less vibrant than the colors initially are. And I just get going back and forth between adding these different plobs of colors and then smudging them together with a drier brush. I also wanted some darker spots between these brighter colors, so I added some brown, some green, and some bluish gray as well to really add some color variation here. We'll still add some final touches to the ground later, so at this point let's jump back to the top of the painting where we'll finally add the large trees next. This is probably the most nerve-wracking part of the picture, but don't worry about it, it's gonna be fine. So I mixed yet another dark blue gray shade, and then we'll start painting these dark tree trunks all the way to the top of the painting. I tried to make these lean ever so slightly to different directions to not make them exactly symmetrical, and I also made a few thicker and skinnier trees. The skinny ones will be further in the picture, so the point where they connect to the ground should also be slightly higher than the trees up front. And to make the trees blend with the ground, I added some of these darker tones kind of around them to create some shadows, and I think it's just an easy way to melt them to the forest floor. I finished these trees with a few thinner branches. These will pretty much be covered with the leaves, so even if some of the branches don't turn out exactly as you want, it doesn't really matter. But then let's actually start painting the leaves. So here I tried to use the same technique as earlier. So I first added these more pigmented blobs of orange color. Again, I mixed a little bit of this lighter peach tone to the orange to keep it a little bit more muted and less saturated again. But yeah, after these initial blobs of color, I was again working until there was pretty much nothing left in my brush, and then I started to go over those blobs to smudge the edges to create a softer look. I wanted especially the lower leaf layers to look very soft and blurry almost, and then we could add some sharper leaves only to the top layer. This is of course completely optional. If you like sharper look here, you could definitely do that. And I was just trying to play with these soft textures and blending techniques in this painting. I also added a little bit lighter orange shades, especially to the outer edges of the leaves, to really make them almost blend together with the sky color behind, because I think it adds the appearance of some far away leaves here and also creates a bit more dimension. But after I was happy with the amount of leaves here, I chose to paint the pathway next to finally get rid of the white stripe here. The reason I didn't paint this right away was that I wanted it to have a similar tone with the leaves to kind of tie this picture together a little bit. So I started to create some smudgy colors here again. I think it's a good idea to add some darker tones to the sides of the pathway. I think it helps to tie it together with the ground colors. And then I wanted to make sure to leave some lighter spots to the middle to leave some highlights. But now that we pretty much have the whole picture ready, let's finally zoom to the center of the painting to add this small cottage. Now you could paint the cottage pretty much with any color you want. I chose to go with a grayish brown color because I thought it would suit the rest of the cool and gray tones in this picture while still being different enough to draw some attention. But a brighter color or maybe even a black or white cottage might look very interesting as well. I tried not to spend too much time with this step, so you'll see that there will only be a few details in this cottage. I added 2 windows and then this kind of deeper part in the wall here on the right side where the door of the cottage will go. I also tried to add some very light wooden panels here by creating these horizontal strokes. And then I just colored the windows black and later added these very thin white window panels, which ended up being quite a noticeable detail in this whole painting. I think the white color added quite a bit of attention to this cottage here in the middle. So if you want your cottage to kind of blend into the background a little bit more, maybe just leaving the white part out might be a better idea. I always recommend using the tiniest brush you own for these detailing parts, which will just make everything so much easier. And then I added some darker shadows to the ground around the cottage, pretty much the same way we did with the tree trunks, so that this cottage kind of melts together with the crown a little bit better. And we can also make sure that there are no white background bits showing through anywhere. But after that, it's time for the final polishing step. So I wanted to just touch up the crown a little bit. I wanted to add just a little bit more sharpness to it, and I did it by adding some lighter and darker areas with this small detailing brush. So I think these tiny dots and shadowy parts created more texture here and also added some variation and dimension to the crown, which I think makes the forest floor look a little bit more realistic as well. But after tapping on the very last yellow and orange dots, I finally decided to put my brush down and announce this picture ready. I was pretty happy with how this turned out. I really like the colors and the softness here, and I just think it's nice to realize that it's possible to create these softer textures with gouache paints as well. If you decide to give this a go, definitely let me know how it went for you in the comments. And if this was your first time around here and you'd like to stay tuned for more art and journaling, definitely consider subscribing. But I guess that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having an amazing day or night wherever you are. And I'll see you in my next one. Bye bye!